Shoko. Good morning, everyone. Good to see you all here on this beautiful morning. So because we have only two speakers today, we will not have the third speaker, unfortunately. This session everything will move up by 30 minutes. So each of the speakers will have 30 minutes. Then we'll have 30 minutes of question and answer. And then this session will conclude at 10 a.m. So to begin, I just want to say that it is my honor to moderate this panel of excellent scholars who will speak on the theme of the historical significance of His Holiness the Sixth Dalai Lama. This panel, specifically, as was mentioned, includes two speakers, Dr. Ian MacCormack and Dr. Shoko Mekata. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Ian MacCormack. Dr. MacCormack is Assistant Professor of Religion at Florida State University. And the title of his presentation this morning is The rnga Chen and the Education of the Sixth Dalai Lama. So please join me in warmly welcoming Dr. MacCormack.
Okay, thank you. And it's good to see everybody again. And I'm probably just going to jump right in. Hopefully it goes without saying how grateful I am to be here and how much I've been enjoying all of your company so far. But I want to cover a lot, so I'm just not going to waste any time. Can we just go to the next slide? I can actually read that pretty well. So I'm going to start by just setting the scene. I want to read a passage. This is from Rasal Sergi Nema, and the date is December 5th. So this is just several days before going into Lhasa for the enthronement. And the Desi is writing about Tsangyang Gyatso, whom he just met shortly before this. And he says, well, he could not study much while traveling through Nakartse and the rest, owing to the circumstances of the caravan, the plethora of new arrivals into his presence. But upon reaching Nyetang, I myself being regularly present to meet with him privately, by and by he brought up all sorts of general and specific questions about challenging points of sutra, tantra, and the arts and sciences, such that his true wisdom was piously enriched and he gained confidence. Now, at the time, I answered these inquiries with what immediately came to mind, and if I was certain of the source, since I had brought many texts along with me, I would check the relevant citations in the evenings and give as much of an answer as I could there while we were in Nyetang. But it happened that some questions I could not answer, and we'd have to wait until we went back to Lhasa to consult the sources. Next slide. Now, the passage, it's quite a long passage. I'm just going to paraphrase this because I want to get to what comes after this. But the Desi brings up some minor grievances about the quality of the text that he was working with for his education in astronomy, uses the Swarode or Yangchar to instruct him on some points about, for instance, the process of death and rebirth. And as he says, as for the other arts and sciences, in the course of things, Tsangyang Gyatso had also been studying these after the fashion of a layperson. Let's go to the next slide. This is the part I wanted to get to. But the most important thing, so the Tibetan here is the part highlighted in orange. The most important thing was his obligation to turn the wheel of Dharma for ordinary folk, just as the fifth Dalai Lama had done, to wit, emphasizing the tradition of Manjushri Dharma Lord Tsongkhapa the Great. So I informed him about this obligation and about how to do so. And he requested that I assemble a composition that would use few words to convey a meaning that could be expanded or contracted with pointers for how to proceed. In other words, references to other relevant texts. And accordingly, in Nyetang, he made a start of learning from me this text, the Lha'i Chen. And this is what I want to talk about in my remarks today, this text. This is just another passage relevant. This happens about a month later. This is actually still in the middle of the enthronement ceremonies, during which the education of the Dalai Lama is ongoing. And very similar point here. For his intellectual progress, I felt the only truly important thing was serving his disciples by turning the wheel of Dharma. So, like His Holiness before him, he has studied extensively from the profound Dharma of Sutra and Tantra. Plus, to be an all-knowing one, not just in name, but equally in the sense, he also had to master the greater and lesser arts and sciences after the fashion of a layperson. So, having internalized the Lha'i Chen as a source for memorizing texts in the proper sequence, he could be somebody who would effortlessly turn the wheel of Dharma as it was currently being taught to him, primarily by the Panchen Rinpoche. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. So this is the text in question here. The full title of it, Jogun Depe Shingsai Dendun Chechar Bepe Ngunjo Tam Lha'i Nga Chen. So the Lha'i Nga Chen, that's the title of the text, the divine drum, and it is a Ngundro Tam, and I would actually translate this as something like a rhetorical source book. And then we have the poetic title here. It brings down the reign of the good Dharma onto the fields of the faithful people. Now, this was started, as we just saw, shortly after the meeting of Sixth Dalai Lama and Tsangyang Gyatso in December 1697, and the work on it continued for the rest of the year. It was the colophon at the end of the text is dated to August 1698. It could probably be considered a minor work of Sixth Dalai Lama, definitely a lesser known one, not much read or discussed in scholarship if it's discussed at all. And there aren't many copies of it available so far, to my knowledge. The one I'm using that I'll show some images of is held by the Library of Tibetan Works and Archives, and there are scans of it of pretty poor quality on TBRC or BDRC. The imprint itself, I've been able to look at the text briefly at the library. It's not a great print, and then when you photocopy it, it makes it worse. So there's some challenges in reading it. I've also seen a attestation that there's a copy in the collection of the Potala as listed in this Karchak that I mentioned here. Let's keep it on this slide for now. So what is it? Well, what is indicated, really the question is what is meant by this term Ngundro Tam, and it's about public oratory. Now, what is meant are the rhetorical forms and formulas and citations and transitions, in short, the kind of background information that the Dalai Lama should use to flesh out and enhance his discussions of various topics that he would be speaking about in various settings, ceremonial, celebratory, instructional, or ritual. The point is that speaking well is about far more than just getting the point across, and doing your ceremonial and ritual duties is about more than just going through the motions. At least for the Desi, as he was training this boy, you also had to be eloquent and capacious in your learning, and more than this, you had to know how to put the pieces together in the right way. And you had to use the right pieces in the first place. So this text was supposed to furnish the Dalai Lama with the appropriate textual references and turns of phrase and so forth, so that he could perform this obligatory role correctly. Now, on the surface, this makes it seem like a rather drab and formulaic text, in my opinion. Basically 200 folios of Buddhist boilerplate. A thick stew of quotations peppered with the occasional comment or performance note. And I don't think there are any really stunning revelations to be found here, but I do want to suggest that this text points us in the direction of what are to me some complex and potentially rich questions about how we think about this Sixth Dalai Lama in history. And I'm putting quotes around this Sixth Dalai Lama intentionally here, because I'm referring less to the flesh and blood teenage boy, the elusive human who seems to fascinate all of us, whose motivations we are trying so hard to grasp, largely through the medium of text, which, in my opinion at least, he's often scarcely visible at all. And I mean more something like the history of the image or the portrait of this figure, the process and the importance of how the Dalai Lama was constructed as a role, as a form of performance according to certain scripts, we might say. And of course, you could say that he's notorious precisely to the extent that he went, so to speak, off script. Now, as we've already seen from the passages I just quoted, what was at stake here is this notion of this duty incumbent on the role of the Dalai Lama to turn the wheel of the Dharma. Familiar enough phrase, but one with special significance in this context of the early Ganden Pochang. Insofar it was a constitutive part of the identity of the ruler and by extension the state itself. It was a major piece and perhaps arguably the central piece of the rubric of what proper political rule looked like. Now I have to stress here that when I speak of Buddhism in the context of the early Ganden Pochang, I mean it was more than just a tool or a useful resource for the government. It already shaped the world in which power was being exercised. It provided the vocabulary for naming its values and its aims, and in turn it formed the direct object of political action. It was the first basic lever for how to use power to achieve broader social or even cosmic transformation. In other words, it was essential to the very idea of politics for the rulers to assert this prerogative to be the foremost agent of Buddhism in the world. And again, when I say this, I don't mean merely being its patron or its protector. I mean something more fundamental. not merely garnering its sanction, but staking a claim for the rulers of being the primary producers of Buddhism, the arbiters of how it was to be produced, and claiming intellectual and technical mastery over it. A claim which, in turn, I would argue aligns very closely with the cosmopolitanism and humanism of this general era. So this is just to say that it's hardly incidental that this familiar obligation to turn the wheel would be appropriated to that project. Or to put it another way, let's go to the next slide, what we might call specialist reading, to adapt a term from the scholar Paul Griffiths, would be essential to the moral and intellectual education, the creation of the persona that was being crafted for the political ruler. And this is just a kind of a signpost I thought that was helpful. As Griffiths says, specialists are likely to be needed when a community of religious leaders has political power. Knowing how to read in such a way as to be able to rule on political matters is not likely to be a skill available to non-specialist readers. And he even brings up the example, as you see, of Tibet. Now, I would actually take this a little differently than Griffiths, even though I think in general he's right here. Knowing how to read correctly is essential to political rule in this context, and not simply because of knowing how to rule on political matters. I think it gets at something far more fundamental than that. Indeed, I would suggest that we think of this obligation to be the foremost producer and purveyor of Dharma, to be its master, as a technique of proper rule. And this text is then, in that sense, a kind of a political document or official discourse, or in another way, a script for the role of the Dalai Lama. And so I don't mean something like cynical here. I'm not talking about this text as a kind of a document of propaganda. And I don't mean it's only about something like rhetorical persuasion or conversion. I mean something much more abstract and fundamental, that it is through these kinds of public demonstrations, in how they're structured, in the impressions they give, and in the actual messages delivered, how those messages are styled and organized in their form and content. Through these practices, something about the very nature of what political rule is and who the ruler is being expressed or possibly even created. So that's kind of the arc of how I'm approaching this text. Let's go to the next slide. So, time permitting, this is all I want to go over here. We'll see how far we can get. Say a couple more things about the education at Tsangyang Gyatso, just because I think it's a very interesting topic. Then the bulk of the talk, I want to actually walk you through this text. It's like I said, about 200 folios. There's a lot of really neat stuff in here. And then, if we have any time left over, I have some more theoretical kind of signposts that I want to bring into your attention that have shaped how I talk about this text. I'm looking at it in three ways. As a kind of official discourse, something that conveys and constitutes and represents the nature of what political rule means in this context. As I've just mentioned, I think of it as a script, as something that is part of the outer representation of the character of the Dalai Lama. And then that leads into some very interesting comparative reflections, especially here I'm looking at the work of the French scholar Louis Marin, who has worked on the Louis XIV, the almost contemporaneous emperor of France, who I think makes a very fitting comparison for the Dalai Lamas in the early Gendan Pochang. But we're probably not going to get to that, so you can ask me about it later. Let's go to the next slide. Just one more passage from the Seginyema. This is another one that gives some hints about his how he was doing with his education when the Desi first met him. And I suspect to a certain extent this text was prompted by the interviews that were being conducted after their first meeting at Nyetang, and we can only speculate about whether the Dalai Lama was living up to the very high standards set for his education by the Desi. So he says, back when he was at Sona, per my request and as beseeched by the Chuje, that's one of his two interlocutors, this is Silnun Dorje, he learned to recite from memory the entire Dratsang Duncha, the liturgy of the Namgyal College, as well as, among other things, the root text of the Nyengak Melong Kavya Darsha, the root grammar, both the root tantra and the explanatory tantra of the medical tantras, the latter one at least up to the part on urinalysis. He also got instruction on texts like my tarnish remover, that's the Vaidya Karpa Yasel, and the root kosha text. Since the start of the Ox year, he had scant opportunity for study because of all the distractions, the many new arrivals, and so on. Most important thing, so same theme again, was to prioritize turning the wheel of Dharma, to which end, taking as a source the fifth Dalai Lama's text, which has this title, Jinang Rikte Jinlap Ki Tsamjor Tinle Chugyun. I'll talk about that in a second. That was basically one of the inspirations for the Desis, the current text that we're reading. As mentioned above, starting from Nyetang in the mornings, he was studying my new composition, the Lha'i. the memorization of whose edits, without being requested, he was already beginning from the 15th. So pretty much right on the spot after being put on his throne, he's getting put to work memorizing this text. Now you see here, let's go to the next slide, some clues to the education of the Dalai Lama. I've culled out most of the major passages in the Sergei Nyima on the annual or sometimes twice yearly reports that were being delivered to Lhasa of how his education was going. You get a lot of information here about the kinds of texts he's reading. We're not going to have time to go over all this, so I'll just highlight a couple neat things on here. But you see, he gets going with the alphabet and knowing how to read aloud in 1687, and his real education begins when his tutor arrives in 1690. And already by 1691, look at what he's reading, Vajra Karpo. He's memorizing the Vajra Karpo. He's learning the Namgyal College liturgy, and a number of works are mentioned there. And then later the same year, the Yasel, which is the companion text to the Vajra Karpo, clarifying many of the points that are expressed there. Let's go to the next slide. This one I'll focus on. This is one of the more meaty reports. So he's eight and a half years old at this point by Western reckoning. This is his reading list that he has here. That's his Yasel and the Nyenjun, another text that prompted the responses of the Yasel. So this is a kind of a critical interrogation of the Vajra Karpo. Sangwa Gechem of the fifth Dalai Lama, Vajrakalpika Sutra, Vajra Karpo, again the Namgyal College text, Kadam teachings, the Lamyum Chi Jampal Shelung, this text, Senjugi Jopa, that I believe this is actually the Trimeya, the commentary on the Kala Chakra Tantra. He's learning grammar, he's learning mantras, and then his memorization is continuing, primarily, in this case, it looks like to me, Jangter texts that he's learning to memorize. Leu Dunma has special significance for the Dalai Lama and the Desi. Among other things, Sangpo Drakpa, the Tertun, was a past life of the Desi, or was claimed as a past life of the Desi. Actually, so this, to me, speaks to a point that Imaeda-san raised yesterday about the question of who did Tsangyang Gyatso think he was at this time, having been told that he was the Shalu Kenshin Toku. But to me, I look at this list and I think, if you're told that you're a Toku of someone and this is the homework you're being assigned, I think I could guess who you were in one or two guesses. It wouldn't be too hard. The theme that unites all these readings is the fifth Dalai Lama. Let's go to the next slide. Now, this is just more of the same. He's reading Kavya. He's reading the Rinpoche commentary on the Kavya Darsha. He's reading Kshemendra, so he's getting a lot of education in Kavya here. This is when he writes his two sadhana texts that get sent to Lhasa in manuscript form, his two earliest compositions. Let's go to the next slide. And so on and so forth. I'm afraid I can't spend too much time going over this, but this is a daunting reading list. So it also maybe speaks to questions we have about the factors that went into the, let's say, the way the Dalai Lama felt about himself at this time and the responsibilities that were being foisted upon him. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, I want to walk you through this text as much as I can, and I'm going to try to point out a couple neat things that I find in it. But let's start. Let me just give you, this is an overview of the gist of what we find in this text. Now, there's no kind of formal outline here. This is basically my way of breaking it down, but I also followed more or less in the colophon. We find he gives a decent synopsis of what he plans to talk about, and the text basically follows that pretty closely. The transitions between sections are sometimes quite fluid, and in other places, different topics are actually nested inside of each other. I'll show you some examples of that. So it was a tricky text to pull apart and figure out what was happening here. It begins with some prefatory material, some opening verses, and talking a little bit about why the text was written, or maybe more accurately, why it wasn't necessary to write it in certain senses. Then we get some really introductory Buddhist topics for about 40 folios. This is quite familiar stuff. And there's a very interesting section on relevant topics. We're talking at the Munlam Chenmo and also the Tsokcha Chenmo, the holiday that happened in the second month to commemorate the fifth Dalai Lama's death. Then there's a very long section on Tantra. That's the part that is basically taken verbatim from a text written by the fifth Dalai Lama. And then the parts that are, to me, the most interesting, sections 5 and 6 have much more to do with oratory, with how to be a proper public speaker, and how to tailor remarks to different audiences, different occasions, how to give basically informed, intelligent background information on all kinds of things, but to do so also in a very eloquent way. And in section 6, how to address your audience appropriately, how to name different people in the seat of the assembly, how to express your gratitude. There's a lot of very, very interesting material here for thinking about the art of how to be a good public speaker. So now let's dive into the text a little more, if you could go to the next slide. Now, I pulled out 2 passages in the prefatory material that I found quite interesting. It's a common theme here. There's no need to give this kind of education to a being who's already omniscient. As you can see in this first line, Shoko ngunjola sopa kanya yedomane rangshingi jupe kempa shentang majawe tsutongi ngango tong tumpe sensi la sopa gala ang madopar bemedu jungwan mase. So he can learn this effortlessly without having to rely on any kind of work in any way, because it's something he knows primordially. It's naturally established as a kind of an innate, inherited wisdom. And so that's one reason why this is kind of an anti-purpose, why the text was not necessary. Another, and this is a more disparaging remark here you see in this second part, I'll just paraphrase this second part. Apart from some nice language of a chen, a high lama, or some other important learned person, saying, I'm going to do this sort of person is teaching this sort of text. Apart from this kind of nice language, these days, mostly what I find is they do nothing more. Their tongues grow short, and all they do is give the words of the empowerment, and they don't provide any kind of longer lecture explanation that would be pertinent to the sources, the purposes, and so on and so forth. So this is the Desi's critical justification. He's quite critical of the shortcomings of other religious public speakers who lack the kind of vast, broad, cosmopolitan education that he's trying to impose on the Sixth Dalai Lama, in which I would surmise he considers himself the paragon of, like the Fifth Dalai Lama before him. So it's kind of a very crass remark of saying, like, what's even the point? Nobody even knows how to give a proper speech these days. Then he very neatly also quotes Sakya Pandita here on the bottom. It's not just that the Dalai Lama is sort of supernaturally brilliant. The passage reads roughly something like, you have to keep learning even though you might die, because even if you don't reach a high level of scholarship in this lifetime, it transfers over to your next life like inheriting your own money out of the bank. You withdraw your knowledge from the bank between one lifetime and the next. And I think that's a very fascinating idea that I like very much. And so this is how he walks into beginning to talk about the material of this text, as you see at the end here. And then he basically gets going with the rest of the text. Let's go on to the next slide. I'm actually going to skip this part. I just want you to see what's in here. This is what I call basic Buddhism. This is all very, very familiar material. So I just want you to look at that for a couple seconds, and then I'll move on to the next part. Mulan Chemo, and etc. Really, he means also the Tsokchu Chemo, as I mentioned. That's a holiday that started on the 25th of the second month, and at that time it was about a week long, and revolved around the Potala Palace and the Zamling Genchi Kichoten, the stupa of the Fifth Dalai Lama. Most of this has to do with how do you talk about the Buddha, but talking about the Buddha becomes, in a way, kind of a prefatory way of really talking about especially the Fifth Dalai Lama and to a lesser extent the Desi himself. I'll show you an example of this in just a second. And then, like in many other parts of this text, after making his general comments about how to talk about these topics, the Desi will give a very specific example at length. In this case, Tsongkhapa. So you get about 12 folios of how to talk about Tsongkhapa, mostly drawn out of the Vaidurya Serpo. Let's go to the next slide. I put some passages up for you to look at here. So you can see that this is kind of I would rate this as in the middle of the quality of the reproductions of these. This is not the easiest, but not the hardest folios to read. Now, where I typed this up, where it says Perjit Samdu Khladim Munlamdu, that is on the 5th line of the top folio there, if you want to actually venture to try to read that block print yourself. And again, I'll just kind of paraphrase it. He's giving some history of the history of giving teachings at the Munlam, starting with in the time of Tsongkhapa. When Tsongkhapa instituted this holiday, he developed also a tradition of giving kacha, giving public lectures. And then in later years, not only would they, where'd that go? they would basically use primarily the 34th chapter Jataka of Arya Shura, but then I'm just going to have to wing it, I guess, until that comes back. In the time of, I believe it was Gendon Drup, the second Dalai Lama, they began alternating with Kshemendra's Avadana Kalpalata. And well, that's really a shame because this is one of the saltier passages, but he basically says something along the lines of the fact that he's quite disappointed with the paucity of the lectures that were being provided by the main public speakers at the Munlam. He thought they had gone back to relying exclusively on the 34th chapter Jataka, and typically they didn't continue from year to year. They would only really do the beginning of, they'd get through a few chapters, and then the next year they wouldn't pick up where they left off, and he's quite disappointed in this fact, and is critical of them. He even surmises that they could not, as he puts it roughly, untie the knots of Dundan. They didn't have the skill to unpack the difficult language of Kavya through which one should properly talk about the life of the Buddha. And so then that is followed by roughly 2 or 3 folios of fleshing out many, many other texts that you can use to talk about the life of the Buddha. And what the Desi is especially interested in are episodes in sutras and tantras of the Buddha generating bodhicitta before other Buddhas in his past lives. And he gives probably a dozen sources for this. The most important for his purposes are the Karna Pundarika Sutra, that's Nyingje Pema Karpodo, and Mayopama Samadhi Sutra, Gyuma Dabu Tingi Zingido. And this is a moment of intertextuality because you find very matching conversations in many of the Desi's other texts, especially Dukula, Volume Nga, and Vaidyaya Serpo, and really bringing up all these instances of the generating bodhicitta of a Shakyamuni Buddha is prefatory to talking about the same thing for the 5th Dalai Lama as a way of introducing the discourse of the connection between the Dalai Lama and Avalokiteshvara. So one of the reasons for fleshing out how one talks at Munlam about Shakyamuni is really that it becomes a way to talk about the 5th Dalai Lama. And I was going to have another passage on there that I was planning to read for you, where then he basically says, oh, well, I'm just the only one who can't see it then. Where are we now? Yeah, let's do this one. I'm sorry I didn't put that in Tibetan. I only have it in Wylie. There's quite a few parts that the reading is unclear. Now it's gone. Yeah, okay. It's kind of hard for me to see at this angle. Kapgar, on some occasions. You should also talk about how Tsongkhapa generated bodhicitta. And your source for that, Sara Zhepey Ganden Chuchung. Sara is Desi Sangye Gyatso. That's his pen name. This is the Vaidyaya Serpo. Use that as your source. You can also Tsokchu Chemor Tanda Dukle Ngabe Goju Chirimbuche. So these days we also use the volume Ngabe Dukla sometimes to talk about these things. If you want Sapshe Dabuam Nirdu Seldu Tangna, if you want something more in depth, use Mejun Kalpama Jalwa, the commentary to the Mejun Kalpama. This is a text called the Mutik Chumpo. Mejun Kalpama is the Chungrap of the 5th Dalai Lama, written by the. Oh, that's a shame. Anyways, then I'll skip the rest. These are all basically texts by the Desi. He's going through his whole corpus and teaching you how to use his corpus to talk about things at Munlam. Let's go to the next slide. Here's the Tantra section. This, like I said, is taken mostly verbatim from a text by the 5th Dalai Lama, but interspersed with very long excurses on how to give lineages and histories for especially Kala Chakra, Gulya Samaja, Chakra Samvara, and Vajrabhairava. He also adds a very long section on Nyingma with specific discussions of the rebirth of Tri Songdetsen, that is to say, past lives of the 5th Dalai Lama, according to the Jangter tradition, very important material. And then Rigzen Gudem, Nyangrel, and other figures. Let's go to the next slide. This is the stuff that I like best. How to discuss the history and sacred objects at various sites. If you're giving a speech at Lhasa or at the Potala, you have 10 folios on how to talk about the statues inside the Potala Palace. Also, you get remarks for how to talk about sacred objects at the major seats of the Gelugpa school. Let's go to the next slide. And this is my favorite part. Rhetorical addresses for different members of the seated assembly. There's a whole poetic discourse of how to describe how they sit in the drell, the seated rows, with different, as Dan Martin mentioned yesterday, the surgyen, those who ornament the edges of the assembly, the principal chief elite figures, unyen, they hold down the head of the assembly, and so on and so forth. And here sometimes we have interspersed what seem like tremendous digressions. So when he talks about how to name the Sangha in general and how they sit, actually what you talk about when you talk about the Sangha is the Sanghiki Dempa and the Dempe Netse, the measure of the existence of the Buddhist teachings in the world, chronologies of how long Buddhism will last. Especially he uses the 5,000-year chronology from the Bhumtika on the 100,000 Prajnaparamita and the four ages of a Kala Chakra. And this is all very political discourse because it was imperative to the Desi to say how Ganden Potrang existed in history. In what kind of age was it existing in? Because the project of the Ganden Potrang was to create the Dzogden, the Krita Yuga, the perfected age. So you get a lot of chronological discourse here. Let's move on. I just want to show you as much as I can before I run out of time. Site-specific rhetorical remarks. Another long section on how to talk about cosmology and how to tailor specific ways of speaking to places like Potala and the Densasum, the three seats. Let's go to the next slide again. 2 minutes left. Can I pause my time while the slides come back? I don't even know what to say now. I'll just kind of paraphrase. The last portion of the text, then, he gives many formulas for how to express gratitude for different groups of people, starting from the Buddha, of course, but moving up all the way, especially gratitude for Tsongkhapa, how to talk about gratitude for the Dalai Lamas, for the Ganden Potrang, for the Desi himself, and those are also supposed to be used at certain times and places. And then also we have a very long section of prayers and blessings, and these are quite familiar, of course, but I was, oh, thanks. It's okay, I can just wing it, it's fine. I had highlighted to show you a very nice way of how to pray for the longevity and stability of the Ganden Potrangi Chusi Sungden, and a very nice prayer for the Desi himself, appropriate for teachings at the Tsokje Chemo. So let me just try to jump to my conclusion now, and we'll see. Let's start jumping ahead now. Let's go way ahead. Keep going. This is all this stuff I would have, we're going to skip these. These are some very nice passages. Okay, I want to leave it here. This is good. This is from Irving Goffman, a very famous book, The Presentation of Self. It talks about the scriptedness of elite roles. Basically, his point is the more prestigious and more authoritative you are, the more bound to the role you are. The more that you have to inhabit the character of what you're supposed to be like, and the less you can break character. And as he puts it, the limiting case is heads of state who have no teammates. They are all script. The king is a role before it is a person. And I think this is a helpful way of thinking about how the Desi was creating Tsangyang Gyatso in the image of the Dalai Lama as the ruler of Tibet. And then one more slide here. This is too complex. I don't think I can get into this. This is the semiotic stuff about representation and power. The power of representation and the representation of power. And I just think that's actually a very useful lens for thinking about the role of Buddhism, of teaching Buddhism, of eloquence and mastery and intelligence as shaping the character of the Dalai Lama and, by extension, the state of which he was the head. That through this text, it is not just a way of representing his power, but it is also itself a kind of way of creating power through representation. So I guess I'll have to stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. MacCormack, for that fantastic lecture. I want to invite up now our second speaker, Dr. Shoko Mekata. Dr. Mekata is Research Associate at the Asia Center at Harvard University. And the title of Dr. Mekata's talk today will be The Sixth Dalai Lama as Witnessed by Lelung Zhepey Dorje, 1697 to 1740. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Mekata.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Okay. Okay. So first of all, I want to express my gratitude to the everyone who has provided me with this such a wonderful opportunity, especially Chief Minister Pemashri Kandula and Tupten Kandela and Mojila, and then of course Tengyu Rinpoche, and then Zarina. Because of everyone's effort here, I can be here and right now. So thank you so much. So before I start my paper, I want to explain why I'm speaking about this topic today. In the fall and winter of 2024, I had an opportunity to participate in a Tibetan reading class taught by Zhepey and the Professor Gyatso at Harvard Divinity School in America. In the class, we read many different texts, such as Miwan Tokju, or like Nawe Chulen, or the Kukenyu, Jongin Teni Serje, etc. And then I myself usually focus on the Sakya history, like biographical and historical materials, especially like the early Sakya school around the 11th to 14th centuries. So the text we read in the Zhepey Mabum's class were really new to me, and then I really hadn't read so much before. And also, like, at least to me, it was quite difficult. But I really enjoyed the class. And in the class, there were about 12 or 13 people, if I remember correctly. And then about half of them were Tibetans, which is not common in the American universities. And then one of the students in the class was Tengyu Rinpoche. So, and then, here, Annie Dorje Doma. So we were studying in the class, the same class, about 2 years or so. So this is why I came to know Tengyu Rinpoche and the others, and then why I'm here today. So thank you so much. So originally, this paper was planned to be presented together by Zhepey Mabum and me, and unfortunately, he was not be able to come here today. So I am going to present this alone, but this entire idea came from his class. So I want to emphasize this paper is not only by me, but also the result of a collaboration with Zhepey Mabum. Among the successive Dalai Lamas, the sixth Dalai Lama, Tsangyang Gyatso, is a controversial figure. Historians and religious scholars have held differing views regarding him. However, since he disappeared when he was very young, there are not many accounts directly talking about his life during his lifetime. The fifth, Lelung Zhepey Dorje, personally met and conversed with the sixth Dalai Lama on a few occasions. Lelung Zhepey Dorje was also one who heard first-hand accounts about the sixth Dalai Lama that were circulating within the Tibetan society at that time. And next slide, please. He recorded many of these, and then his direct observations and experiences with the sixth Dalai Lama in his own autobiography, Lipezin Palosantin Reki Tokju Kesanga Tung, and the story of the knowledge holder, Losantinle, a festival of good fortune. Today, I will introduce some of the author's observations to reveal how he perceived the sixth Dalai Lama. I just want to mention that this paper is not like only introduce the personal impressions according to the Lelung's autobiography, but does not analyze what kind of person like Tsangyang Gyatso himself was. Some people have already mentioned about his autobiography, the Lelung autobiography, yesterday and the day before yesterday. in the conference here. And then, so I'm not going to talk in detail about this autobiography, but I want to read a part of it with you, all of you, especially about when Lelung first met the Sixth Dalai Lama when he was little. Next, please, okay. In 1699, the fifth Lelung, when he was 3 years old, was officially recognized as the reincarnation of the fourth Lelung, Jedun Gendun Chuge Wanchu. The first account about the sixth Dalai Lama by Lelung appears when Lelung was 3 years old. Quote, whenever a new incarnation arrives, many Dharma protectors such as Ramo and Samye, His Holiness the Sixth Dalai Lama Tsangyang Gyatso, Panchen Rinpoche, and the Mindu Teritun Rinpoche, and so forth, were consulted numerous times for divination and prophecies. His Holiness the Sixth Dalai Lama Tsangyang Gyatso said, try to ascertain if it is the actual person. So he was not sure. Then when doubts arise, do the investigation. End quote. So although this is not something that happened when Lelung met the sixth Dalai Lama in person, but this is the first description about the sixth Dalai Lama by Lelung. Next, please. The next episode is from when Lelung was 6 years old in 1702, when the sixth Dalai Lama performed the haircutting ceremony for Lelung. So Lelung's autobiography gives the vivid account of the sixth during the event. This is a long quote, but I want to read it together with you because it's really interesting part. Quote, in the 8th month of the water horse year, 1702, at my age of 6 years old, we prepared for going for the haircut ceremony at His Holiness Tsangyang Gyatso. Abargyamon looked at the planets and the motion of the stars, and then the result of the astrological meeting was good, so we departed Lelung and crossed Sanli. When I was going to the Yangon monastery, at the time of arriving in the Gunjong town with a large procession of monks who were welcoming us from the monastic school, I arrived at the storehouse. I stayed there and visited monasteries, etc. At the time of visiting the blessed statue of Zhepey Rinpoche, which was known as Tashido Kama at the Shele Chapel, companion said, "What is this?" Then, since I naturally said from his memory, Tashido Kama, those who were there considered what Lelung said as a recollection of the current, the previous Lelung former lives, because the first Lelung was the student of the Zhepey Rinpoche. And next, please. And during that time, since its coincidence with the sixth Dalai Lama's mother, Tsewa Ramo, circumambulating at Tardu. Having said that, we all should go to see her. We went to see her at Tardu. At that time, since most lamas have to prostrate to her, the Dalai Lama's mother, and then wife of the Tsangyang Gyatso, etc. At the time of prostrating by me also, since I was young, so this is I did learn. I prostrated so many times. Then all of the masters and attendants laughed. I thought the one who is called Gyeyum shouldn't have been someone like this. I thought this one who looked like someone with like blue face and Mongolian clothing is Yashawa. Please tell me what's Yashawa. I really don't know. I thought like something like strange or amazing. And the Dalai Lama's mother didn't say anything. And her assistant asked me some questions. And he gave me gifts, etc. in the guest house. And next, please. Having requested giving good kata and blessings to me, they were sitting near me. At that time, thinking like a child, decorating such as like murals and golden victory banners of the palace were fascinating. I showed them to my companions. Since I was not looking at the number of the people and was not shy, everyone said, where is this truku from? One who is like this small boy is really powerful. And then they were amazed about Lelung. Then the chief assistant also came and said, since His Holiness has gone to the corner of the Namse Genzu, I believe this is the name of the government treasury, and go to see him. If the Sixth Dalai Lama has some questions, since you have a small truku, it probably wouldn't happen, which means since you are too little to answer the questions, so you older people answer them. Then, since I said, I can answer by myself. Then he was really happy. And then actually the next one is really the most important, impressive part. Next, please. Then I went to have an audience. His Holiness wore thin garments, which were pale blue, very thin silk. His hair reached almost to the underside of his ears. His Holiness, who put rings, etc., on every finger, had attendants on either side of him, who also carried various kind of mismatched quivers and gloves. And then, so those attendants stayed standing. His Holiness was incomparably, magnificent. As soon as I saw him, face arose spontaneously, and then, since his body was brilliant, I couldn't look at him continuously. Since he had been staying with excellent qualities, good qualities, without any obstructions, I developed authentic faith. When I requested empowerment, as soon as I touched the back of his hand, which was connected with his wings, accidentally. So then he showed kindness. Then smiling, he left with his attendants right away. Next, please. And quote, still. Then, on the auspicious day, when I asked His Holiness to allow me to offer him cutting of my hair, His Holiness came back. Then he said, it is reasonable that I take cutting now, but I had changed my physical body, which means right before this, he gave up his monkhood. So I don't do these kind of things for others now, so just imitation will be enough. So I give you the precious golden reliquary. I can give you a name. Then he went. Also, as a joke to the chief assistant, he said, right now, I will name Jerun Turku as Ani Tintin Roma. So Chief Minister said that I should go back to His Holiness now and ask, and so forth. And the next is the actual hair cutting ceremony part. Next, please. And next day, I went for offering my hair to His Holiness. Then whoever the teacher was A main attendant had come as the representative. Having arranged this, he gave me kata at the dome of kata. After that, His Holiness took my piece of hair. After offering my hair towards the precious golden reliquary, His Holiness gave me name as Losan Tempe Genchen, and he gave a name inscription stamped on a seal as well. On that day, he gave a name to the little monks from Sanli Ugenling as well. He didn't take their hair, so he didn't take the hair, end quote. So Lelung states various descriptions on the Sixth Dalai Lama, even from when he was very little. His autobiography can show many historical accounts around that time related to the Lasan Khan and the Sixth Dalai Gyatso, etc. Still, among that, his description when he met the Sixth Dalai Lama is very vivid and interesting. And from this, we can see that the Sixth Dalai Lama appeared to be Lelung as a very unique and interesting person. And just imagine how cool the Sixth Dalai Lama looked, wearing rings on each of his fingers. From this, we can get a kind of sense of why Lelung did not consider the Sixth Dalai Lama as not strange, but rather as amazing and charismatic. I'm done. Thank you so much. Okay.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Mekata, for that interesting talk. So we have plenty of time now until 10 a.m. for questions and responses. Please, I believe there's microphones going around, so please just raise your hand and wait for the mic to come to you before you begin to speak. So who would like to raise a question?
Thank you very much for two great talks. I have a very short question to Ian. So one of the slides mentions that Tsangyang Gyatso practiced calligraphy first, and then it is specifically mentioned that he practiced calligraphy on paper. Does it mean that he started trying to write on wooden books, on a wooden book, not on a paper?
I don't know. I think they specifically mentioned paper in that one, and indeed, even in some of the early reports, even before he was able to write text, he was writing little snippets of. First, they were bringing samples of his handwriting to show to the Desi, who liked it very much, and then he wrote something like Sangye Gyatso Tupa or something like some document was this is for Sangye Gyatso, and then eventually he wrote these two sadhana texts. But I don't know whether he was working on some kind of samta or something like that. I don't know. Yeah.
It's just common practice, right, to start writing on this wooden kind of book, covered with soot or something like that, and only after that a person can continue practicing on paper. So maybe this is what is implied here.
Yeah, I'm probably the last person who would know about customary practices like that, but that's very helpful to me to know that. There is an anecdote of when the Desi was an 8-year-old boy and he was first meeting his tutor, they were tracing, if I remember correctly, they were tracing characters out in the dust on the floor of the room in the potala, and then there were some auspicious signs that took place. Yeah, but thank you. Yeah.
Other questions? Oh. One here, and then we'll go to Dan.
Okay. Could I get a translation microphone, please? Or,
Oh, did you say now? Then the number ninety get an around the lossy chamber. Did you say? Then Missy Tras came in here. Can it is a situation? And just Lelung Jeton Pema Zhepey, Dorje, Ronam, no Lea, but Gasha get to Kogichaso, don't ask. Did you chase any shade? That didn't allow gyatso ji le so de ya kansa shu yi de karo sena di thone nga ju shi ya kar de sena chonyo janso de mi shika chumbo yo sare sene tsapo zo de ta tsapo ya shi zo sa competition da de lelung jeju pe ma jebe do je na ta na ne tenger kar tenger sena di na lo ne tenchi lelung jeju chonyo janso kindi cha bare ka de di chonyo janso la teju cha be ka kesha ane teju cha sala desi sanji janso de janyen chemo de ten mi mombo de de chesa teju cha ne demba de be ka demba shaka za ma to demba cha be kone teju menda desa cha ma cha be kone chonyo janso taja go jen chu kone lang de pe ni ju ro so ane mi kanga cha ke che ge desi ya lang che de ne gulo chembo re ne ya shanta ma so se ge chi ulo di to nga chi kar cha pa zo to go de sana chonyo janso shika chumbo yabada sosi kantambada sosi taki ngizi yimbe namba de seba zo tukundus teza ane te ya te shinde dunda masina ya saba piwa ise shoy diche tene niba de chonyo janso ge tisalo ni zo ton kwa de shi saba pe mazi so shi diche tanda bada ngazi sonshe nonge no chonyo janso tisalo ni no de shi saba so chi shi maso de chan no be sumba diche se shoy diche
Basically, what I was saying, that actually is not.
Yeah, it's very faint in the earphones.
Just brief translation. First point, he mentioned that your Shoko's presentation was wonderful, amazing. It's almost 99% complete. But he wanted to fill that 1% as a comment, not expecting any answer. Where he was saying that there was a time when a long life offering was offered to the Sixth Dalai Lama. Just before the offering of the Mendel Tensum, he suddenly got up and left the place. And Desi was surprised, wanted to get up, but he was already an old man who couldn't do that. So all this clearly shows that the Sixth Dalai Lama is a very stubborn person. When he feels something, he decides it, doesn't care what others are thinking. So he wanted to compliment that with your talk, not expecting an answer. Then to your presentation, he said that your presentation was so good in the sense that not many of the presenters before made such a complete presentation on the process of study of the Sixth Dalai Lama, including all the sutric, tantric texts that he studied. So thank you so much. That's what he was saying.
Okay, so there are two hands, and then Dip.
Lha'i, there is a fairly good copy in the possession of the Rai Bahadur Densaba collection in Gangtok. And my understanding is the Lha'i is a text how to have a model classical Dalai Lama. And that's one. And then we don't call Chizun, Shabdung, Lelung Dorje. Chizun is not there. He is always called Lelung Chedung or Vega Chedung. And then in the biography, if you go way down there, there's a very, very interesting, intriguing remark that someone coming from Dome, pretending to be Sixth Dalai Lama. That's an extremely interesting remark. Thank you.
I'll just say, Well, I'd be interested to look at the copy in Gangtok to see if the print is clearer, because there are some passages in this one that are quite difficult to read, and I've been able to see photographs of the LTWA one, and it's a little easier, but there are some tricky passages. As far as you said, modern classical education, I think that's a really excellent way of putting it. The theme I've seen elsewhere in a lot of Desi's writings is a kind of almost paradoxical idea that when he always is justifying how superlative and excellent his works are, and often he does so by, in a sense, claiming to be, whether this is true, or whether he's correct or not is a different matter, but what he claims is to be, as I would put it, getting the tradition right completely and for the first time. And so he often talks of his works as unprecedented, not because they're new, but because in a sense they have the most fidelity to tradition as possible, whether it's getting the iconometric proportions of statues perfectly correct, or in this case, mastering the wealth of scripture available to talk about one or another subject. There is something very modern about this kind of breadth of mastery, but its modernity is it's classicism in a sense. So I think actually I'm going to borrow that phrase because it's very nice. I like it. Thank you.
Perhaps someone else can help me with this. My memory is a little bit fuzzy, but I believe that Luciano Petek studied one passage at least from Lelung Jedrom's autobiography, describing an encounter with the Sixth Dalai Lama when he was with a larger group of people. And the way it was translated, it sounded as if his companions were acting quite wildly, drinking and having a lot of fun, while the Dalai Lama was sitting very still and very composed on his seat, while everyone else was having a good time. So if someone knows more about that, I would like to also know. I don't remember which book by Petek it was in. He wrote so many.
There's one question here and one question here.
I am having few qualities, not exactly crucial, but particularly overall conference only, not to the academic. I think I'm allowed. Of course, we have almost reached at the last part of the conference, but few terminology is there. We have to understand. My question is from a living state. It is simple and plain. We are using that term. Some using Dalai Lama, some are using Dalai Lama. Is it the terminology is a Tibetan one, or what does it stand? And from which stage, which period, this term used? Second, yes, we went for the program schedule. One Dalai Lama is mentioned. Of course, Dalai Lama is supreme. To my understanding, one Dalai Lama is not equal, but then I have a question, rather a clarification. When we talk about Mon, it comes Monpa and Monyul. And Sixth Dalai Lama is born in Mon area. Exactly what does the term Mon stands for? And related question is it the term Mon has contributed to delay almost 1.5 decades of time to recognize enthronement of Sixth Dalai Lama as Tsangyang Gyatso and enthronement as born in one area. This is my second question. And third, to me, about date of birth of Sixth Dalai Lama and place of birth. Some places it is found Udili is the place of birth, but some it is referred as Pushangnam. I think Pushangnam is Tibetan terminology. What exactly does it mean? And is this term referring to the place of Sixth Dalai Lama's birth? This is only cheap questions. Of course, it is not related to academic, but I expect some clarification.
Thank you. Some of your questions I'm one of the least qualified people here to answer, but there are many experts of Manuel in the room who can probably find you and discuss more about, for example, the Gushangnang, and there were many speakers who spoke about this earlier. I believe your second question, you were asking whether the fact of the birth of the Sixth Dalai Lama in this region was a factor in the delay before announcing the death of the fifth Dalai Lama. Did I hear you correctly? Yeah, okay. No, I don't think so. The main source we have for understanding the decisions is the Desis Nawe Junlen, and we have to read that somewhat critically because, of course, he's an interested party in this process, and this text is partly written, I think, as a way of explaining and justifying his actions to people who were critical of him. It was written at a very fraught moment in 1696. But in that text, he does describe the process of doing divinations and consulting the oracles to decide how to respond to the death on the basis of instructions that were given to him to conceal that death by the great fifth Dalai Lama. And I can add as a parenthetical that there were many other precedent examples of keeping a death a secret for a period of a year or more, both in kind of the lore that they hearkened back to. For instance, some of the lore around Trisongdetsen and Mune Tsempo was relevant in this context. I believe from the Bashe Shaptakma is the source for that. And more relevantly, Depa Sonam Rapten, for example's death was kept a secret. But the question was put to the divination of whether they, I forget the options, but it was like right away, or when they find the rebirth, or when he comes of age. There were several options, and the answer that fell in the divination was to wait until he comes of age to be seated on his throne. So that's the official justification for the process. So in a sense, it was decided years before even locating the boy. If we are inclined to believe him that this is precisely what happened. There are several indications in the Desi's writings that he was originally inclined to release the secret after 12 years. That would have been a full cycle of the zodiac, and it also would have been timed with the inauguration of the Tsokchu Chemo holiday, which was tied to the construction of the tomb for the fifth Dalai Lama. And I believe there are several places where he mentions the word of the secret leaking out. It's a question for future research, and maybe people here would be well equipped to conduct that research. Following the evidence for who knew what and when. Certain people were led into the secret at certain times along the way. For example, the Terdak Lingpo was told very quickly. But I think it's still a question to be determined precisely who knew what and when, and how the news of this trickled out and in what fashion. But I can't give an answer more than that. But I don't think it was in any way determined by the geographical location of the boy.
Dr. Uji.
Thank you so much. I know this is a little bit cheeky, or is this working? So I know I sent you a document like 2 days ago, and Professor Van der Kuyp was also supposed to talk about this text, and he's not here. It's a Namtar of Tsangyang Gyatso written in 1698 by Khalkhazai Bandita Losan Chinle, one of the earliest Namtars we have of Tsangyang Gyatso written in Tibetan while he was alive. It's not very long, it's about 8 folios, so 16 pecha pages, front and back. And I've always wondered which writings of the Desi was inspired by, because Halkhazai Bandita, he lived from 1642 to 1715. Much of his writings were based on the writings of the Desi, the Vaidura Serpo, the Namtar of Fifth Dalai Lama, but with the many versions that, Ian, you're so familiar with, I was wondering which might have influenced this the most. You don't have to answer this right now, but it's something that's intrigued me for years.
Yeah, I saw your email and I didn't read it yet. But we've talked about this before. At least the short biography of Desi Sangye Gyatso that we find in the Topyika of Jaya Pandita follows very closely what we see in the Vaidura Serpo. And he mentions receiving that text at a certain point, and then the other work of the Desis that he mentions receiving is a Tokme Kalpama. That was on one of my slides, but I went very quickly past it. Tokme Kalpama is a companion to the Mejung Kalpama. It's a trungpa for the Desi. I wrote an article about it about 5 years ago, and it's short. It lists, I believe, 20 past lives of Desi Sangye Gyatso that are connected to those of, and the sources are basically Kadam Lake Bampucha and the let's call it the network of Jangter prophetic literature around, especially Jangdak Tashi Topgel, Ngari Panchen Pemawangel, and Nyangarel and Guru Chorwang, who are cast as past lives of the fifth Dalai Lama in a line going to Trisong Detsen. So basically, other characters are stitched into that for the Desi using the same source base. And I would venture that, I'll look at it, I'd venture the biography of Tsangyang Gyatso probably draws on what we see in Vaidura Serpo. That would be my first guess, yeah. But conversely, I would be quite interested to see if how it deviates from what the Desi wrote. That would be very interesting and useful to me to see that, yeah.
I think we talked about this briefly yesterday, but I think it might be interesting for everyone too. One of the narratives that doesn't seem to be in the Desis is when, in Jaya Pandita's version, when the search party arrives in Manul, and they start presenting different statues of different lamas to the young Tsangyang Gyatso. And when the statue of Tsongkhapa was presented, then he puts it on his head, puts it down. And then he was presented with a statue of the Karmapa, and he takes it, puts it upside down and starts hitting it on the table, and then takes it to his breast and starts to pretend to breastfeed it. So I think that was one that wasn't there. I briefly remember it from reading it now more than 7 years ago. But.
No comment.
That's wise.
Professor MacCormack, I have a quick question about the genre of Nindrotam. So Desi Sangye Gyatso's text, did you get the impression it was really specifically intended for someone Gyatso to be reading and using? Or did it have the feel of being a broader text aimed not just at Sangye Gyatso, but in general, anyone hoping to embody this role of political/spiritual leader? And then along with that, within the genre of Nindrotam, have you been able to compare it to any other authors' Nindrotam text and see if there's similarities or differences?
Thanks. Those are good questions. The first one, in both cases, my answer is basically I don't know, but I'll venture a guess. In the first case, I would guess it was primarily for Tsangyang Gyatso. I think my sense is that the Desi was very concerned with the training of this boy at that time, and had a very clear vision of the role he expected him to fulfill. So that would be my guess. As far as generic comparisons, I have in the past, it's been a long time, but I looked a lot at some of this Tam literature, because the Desi has another text, it's called the Losar Beldam, and it basically recreates a sample speech that would have been delivered in the Potala on the New Year. And indeed, we find many, many short attestations to these kinds of speeches being delivered by members of his circle. There were several people that are named frequently as very good public speakers, and often they were famed for their skill at memorization. I believe that speaks to this idea of a kind of a modern classical education. A good speaker had on the tip of their tongue a lot of things that they could draw on, and a dynamism where they could find the right passage for any moment or occasion. The section in there that had to do with addressing the seated rows, the drell, and that is a very common practice and that you find in many older texts that are labeled either Beltam or Yetam or Moltam. There's many different labels. I've looked at ones by Taranatha and Shakya Chokden, for example. I remember Lochen Dharma Shri wrote one contemporaneous with this. And all those texts use some variant on that formula. It was written about already long ago by David Jackson in his book on the Mollahs of Mustang, which is a really excellent book. But that is a very common practice. But as far as the content of the scriptural material you see here, I don't know. It's quite different from those other Tam texts, which generally are split into Micha and Vlacha, basically genealogies of whatever noble family is sponsoring the event at which you're speaking, and then histories of Dharma that are tailored to that location. Here, as you saw, it's more like this structure of Buddhism, from the basics to the Buddha biographies to the tantric material to this more, let's call it, cosmopolitan discussion of like the palace and the statues and kavya and cosmology and so on and so forth. I don't know if, apart from the Desi's corpus where you find all the same themes reiterated again and again and again, I don't know of other texts that resemble this.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I would like to ask a question to Professor Cormack and Shoko also. First up to Shoko. How reliable is the Lelung Zhepey's biography or autobiography, because it was composed at least 50 years after him, the passing away of the Sixth Dalai Lamas? Because
how reliable?
Because many of the quotations he had mentioned, like not receiving his vows, or at the age of 3, like he is quoting himself, are really amazing somehow. Or maybe we can say he's a child prodigy also, as Geshe-la has mentioned yesterday. Because I'm interested about how the Panchen Lamas and Jamyang Zhepey has mentions about, because in those texts we hardly found the mentions of those quotations in the Lelung Zhepey's biography. And the second part is Professor Cormack. You have listed lots of the texts Tsangyang Gyatso has gone through or had studied at the time. At the same time, we can see that this has mentioned that he is not reliable, he is not studying well, and he has doubt whether he is able to do it or not. And of course, these observations already mentioned by Michael Harris in 1989. So somehow, of course, we cannot deny what Professors Geshe-la yesterday mentioned as child prodigy. So I'm wondering whether you have seen any passages while you're reading through almost 3 biography of the Sixth Dalai Lama where he has mentioned that Tsangyang Gyatso doesn't want to study further on, or he doesn't want to learn anything. Thank you very much.
That's a good point. So when like, the first account is like when he was 3, and then probably I shouldn't compare like myself with him, but I don't remember almost anything when I was 3. So so that it's kind of hard to know how reliable. But when we think about like for example like the citation I read from when he was 6, if the Tsangyang Gyatso like dressed like kind of like showy clothes, wearing like rings on every fingers, that's kind of like I can probably, if I have the similar expression, maybe I can recall very vividly. So that might be the case. And also, like you said, it's kind of hard to know how reliable that is. That is really true. I really don't have the answer for this.
Yeah, I think it's a really valid question and a difficult one to answer. And I should just clarify that the material that I provided on the slides only really covers the reports that were being brought by Dopa and the Chuje, Silnan Dorje, in this period from I think 1687 until 1690, 1696 or 7. I forget when the last educational update was provided. There's a wealth of other material on his education just in the Rapsal Sergi Nima alone. And I was also focusing on his textual studies, but we could mention, so when he was in Nakatse, he met Dorje Drak Toku Pematinle and Terdak Lingpa, and they began to provide maybe not, education is not precisely the right word, but tutelage in their tantric practice. And then later on, during his enthronement, he began his studies with the Panchen Lama, which were, that was his sort of education in the, for example, he was given transmissions of the teachings of the previous Dalai Lamas, and I haven't looked systematically at the rest of the text yet because, frankly, I ran out of time, and not to mention that I didn't have any time to spare in my discussion to get into it anyways. But as far as, the tone of the reports that were being sent to the Desi during the years at Tsona, in the beginning, they're quite effusive. They're not everything he does is perfect. He has the almost otherworldly, he learns incredibly quickly, like no other. And that, that language is not atypical of hagiographical literature in general, where you have to kind of read between the lines if you wish to speculate about whether the truth of his education was maybe not as flowery as the reports would make it seem. It's pure speculation, of course. Eris was basically, I think he looked at the list of texts and said, no way a boy would have any interest in studying this stuff. And I don't necessarily disagree with that. That would be my first impression too. But then again, mainly because I find the Vairagya Karpa almost impossible. It's an incredibly challenging text for me. But I come from a completely different world. So I don't want to superimpose my judgments of what would be hard or easy to teach upon this context. But those reports speak only of memorization and reading. Those are the two verbs that we see being used. I would give the benefit of the doubt to the fact that he was doing what they said he was doing, that at the very least he was memorizing a lot of this material. And as whether his level of how adept he was at it, who can say? I don't really think we have evidence. We can only speculate one way or the other using something like common sense. Certainly it's a daunting education because, as I tried to suggest in my talk, the role created for him was, by definition, a very daunting role. Much was expected of him. And he had big shoes to fill, I think. So I think it's very reasonable to raise those critiques. I just don't know if we have the resources to answer them or not.
There's a question here.
Los Dorje. Dorje goma matsage dise tamanni lejo dela koseshi dise tombando chen lemba dise ane nge shya tangi di chu lesha kechi su jire tengye ane jang chong jansa ma jana ma thi da chabe jela hasung ki ke shwa yore chang jansa de manra ji yi da je de lelung je zhong ti song sha lelung je zhong je za men di te de ane nyala mi ga man thon na sanjel de ba mi she ke te de re esne da khatin ne mo tong de to na ji kar shi to gu de sa na ji na hasung ki chasi ne de rang thon ne jong be tong ba ma to chang jansa mara sam be solo de khol ye sa mare ni ba de lelung je zhong de karina she peng ge ji re she de wata telling teacher ya 당에 저 좋아들이게 디스슈가 선수 지식이 레논 제종 미게 시간도 청이 장서 뭐 시간이라고 해더래 되게 레논 제종 무치질 대전적이 돼 단단 통지야 봐대 뻗듯이 지시하시지 다 저동대 스질한 제세 무시에 통에 지자네 내 카시 빠자마테 세거나 빠자마테네 레데 pena da jinzu ba chinchun di pa sa shuma je ba sa nyen de so chombo shi ya ta ma cha ne pa ja ma pe de pe de le so ya ne sa de me chombo shi wo shi ni ji ni ba de kong ge zambe kan da jan sin na ta se kong ge zambe ta de chi de da chenbo lama jan sin na ta yedam jan sin na ta kan da jan sin na ta de so jan sin na ta de na ne Karo Jazz Nata Dino, Shesa Machina, Korata, Peve Pomajat, Jet Palan, Javashura, Tinjatin. The Somalana may be Temba Noles or Penton Dis to the Gala, Chance, Supe, Rupert in their Marta Yapam, Charak and Javatal Negris, Man Javatal and came with the Kansa Chisanja Sarkatan and taken to Zeni, a trini, Pajata Mare. Tendek me catch up the Soma, Tombush in it, Tombo to Nizis and the Chesapunga, Nanta Tea, there's a tende, Nazuki Carson, Holakonza, the changes which were so much. Nina Nantande, Machasuki, Nantamare, Kongulu Nishazakala, Tibare, and Paja, the Gulu Nishazakala, Paja, Tiki Nanta, the Super Hasmi. Chesa dig Nolola can't teach about the Tandem Nazuki Pena, Kong in Dinolo, Ketchu, Nanga Chesu Yabade, China Janso, the this is Sanji Janso, the Palo was sent to Jadusum, Hazuku, this. Tandan Nazu Peve, Lojima, Yons, Zobe, and the Chigita, Kong Jackin, there's a Kuntosa Yana Mena, Ketchu, Lelung Jeton Pama Zhepey, Dorje, Arunachal Pradesh, Chesa Tena. Pungi Karsagore, de Kora Konzachi, de Ichi Chanjo Chores on the check. Yan Tisoya, Temba, the Mig Karta, Chibome, Tig Gyalwa Tsangyang by the Carisana, Lelung Jeton Pama Zhepey, Dorje, Sumutanda Pa Jatsanjo, the Saton, de Zichisha Cassi. There's a Chicho Male Pangoni, shoot by the Chasan, Tamish Dade, Narang Tamjene, Patches of digging at this or a jeep. The day the chess and Lelung with that is another Chanju Michis or Sugar, some Narada, so decision.
We need a lot of money for translation. So I'll try to be short. First, he said that he had taken 2 occasions to ask questions. Excuse me for that, because by learning that we have some time, I dare to ask these questions. But again, this is really comment and observation to Shoko say thing. He was saying that because these questions have been raised about the reliability of many of the things mentioned there. So Geshe-la was saying that for him, the works by Lelung is really reliable. And he makes a comparison between Lelung Zhepey Dorje and the Sixth Dalai Lama. Both are really outspoken, straightforward. And there are more than 40 volumes at his credit, Lelung Zhepey Dorje. And some of the texts that he composed are so straightforward that they are not published for fear of criticism and things like that. For example, there's one volume where he mentions about he is having hundreds of consorts, right? And then he wanted to publish it, and then his attendant rather suggested that please don't do. It will bring a lot of criticism. Then he said, no problem. If they want to criticize, let them criticize, but I am doing this for the benefit of somebody achieving enlightenment. So anyway, Geshe-la is saying with the confidence, because they are over 40 volumes at his credit, or actually he's not just talking about it, without any understanding. He has in fact audited the 40 volumes when it was once all published. So therefore we can safely take it as a reliable text. Lazam. Then my old man's brain is failing. So regarding the Sixth Dalai Lamas being banished, it was, Geshe-la was saying, it was purely political purposes. From a religious point of view, he is still like having some kind of acceptance that this must be the Sixth Dalai Lama. But so the banishment was purely out of political concerns. And there also, Lelung mentioned that these people, unless they see the hell or experience the hell by themselves, they will not believe in anything. This is mentioned. This is mentioned by Lasan Khan. Now, Gisela made one important remark relating to the life of Sixth Dalai Lama. This remark was made by Lasangkang himself after he was banished. So Lasangkang had told somebody, maybe to the Lelung Dorje, that this Tsangyang Gyatso is a very exceptional person. He's a very different and exceptional person. But he is such a person, he will not believe unless he will see the hell. So this statement, Gisela says, this is the indication that he was simply banished for political reason, not being him as a fake Dalai Lama. So he was Lasangkang himself inside, except that he is really a special man, Dalai Lama, but for a political reason, so he need to be banished because something like that. So best English translation.
Oh, Gonda, Gonda. Oh, teaching, Gonda. And then just a Lelung Zhepey, Zhepey, Dorje, Tawang, Gyalwa Tsangyang Gyatso. Mekata teaching a Yansen and Chichi. Ko bed Majarang Tell again the Tingichi. Kunga Caritiers and Tira Jebe Nolola, the Vetigit, and the Theology Nolan, the Vetigit, don't put in the concho. Tiba Massa Jedi Nitur, Jiba della Shule to Chereges, Diba della Shule, Churus. The Sotangaya, Soma, Nyolela Pimbi Chema, the Hazel, and the Avara Chedi Summer. Just a the shaping each other, chopping each other. There's a Yamarago, and that's also Rago.
I think just a very short remark. Lelung Dorje was a very, as Gisela said, very straightforward, and he was a very exceptional because he was the first Tibetan who has written a text on sexology, Kam Shastra, and there was the middle one, large one, and small. So three texts written on the sexology. Nero, I think two texts. One is my bonus edition.
All right, I think that's a good note to end on. So, and anyway, we're out of time. So, do you want to say anything about? So thank you very much, everyone, for your excellent questions and comments. Let's give a round of applause to our two speakers again. Do you want to